idea of genuine prospect of work. But there's two basic questions, and again, they're not defined in statute, and it's about, have you been in the UK for an appreciable amount of time? Usually that's for a period of 3 months, but again, there's no case law that really establishes that, and there's nowhere in statute. And then the second question you have is, do you have a settled intention to live in the UK? And that's where a lot of EU nationals fall afoul, because you don't have a genuine prospect of work if, for example, you don't speak English at all or very well. Responses to homelessness and conditionality amongst migrants. So I basically interviewed 15 migrants from Eastern Europe who were in different stages of homelessness. Some were sleeping rough, some were in temporary accommodation, some were in incredibly overcrowded conditions, etc. And what became very clear to me is that when people are confronted with constrained choice, when you don't have the ability to earn wages to support yourself, you then turn to the informal economy, either through casual work, cash in hand, or maybe even illicit activity, or you rely on charity and donations or begging. But you have limited value from that, clearly. So then you begin to look at other ways that you can start to minimize the costs of things. And so for most of us, housing is the biggest expense on household budget. So how do you begin to deprioritize housing? How do you make housing less cheap? There is no generic brand of housing, so you have to go to other strategies. So some strategies will be living in overcrowded conditions, doubling up with other families, doing this hot bedding thing where if you're working in a shift pattern, you sleep during the day and then at night you go to work and then the other person takes your bed. You can live in illegal housing, you can live in substandard housing. There's all these things in order to be able to make housing less expensive. And at the extreme end, you can reside in emergency shelter or you could sleep rough. So if what I'm concerned about is choice and how choice is constrained for migrants who find themselves in a very compromised situation in terms of all these different systems that are conspiring against them. Some participants in my study were very clear about having no choice whatsoever. And it was notable that a lot of the people that said that they had no choice they were Roma or Romanian. And I have a few quotes from some interviews I have, but one I thought, what struck me about these interviews was the level of deprivation involved. And Gabrielle's quote is quite succinct. We eat what we have. And what he was saying there is basically, I only have enough money for food. I have nothing else. Another thing that struck me with the interviews is the very low level of expectations people had for intervention from state and state assistance. One Roma participant who I spoke with named Vasil, maybe I'm pronouncing that acronym wrong, that pseudonym wrong, but he's an amputee, he's missing a limb. He's been accommodated in temporary accommodation up a 3-story walk-up, and he mentioned about how difficult it is and how difficult it is for him to do day-to-day things, being accommodated in this place. But at the other hand, he's incredibly grateful, and he thanks God for what he has. So that's no choice. And on the other end of the spectrum, some people I spoke with were very adamant about the amount of choice that they had. In particular, the migrants from Poland, who all seem to share this very strong anti-establishment attitude, who rejected state assistance, rejected even participating in the formal housing market. They were quite adamant about sleeping rough as being their choice, and that they're exercising that choice. And they all emphasize the benefits of not having to pay rent. David, for instance, he was explaining how it's his preference to stay in a squat, even if he was offered, say, council housing, he would reject it because he doesn't want to be constrained by rules and conditionality, and he also doesn't want to pay rent. He's working and he wants to maximize the little wages that he does have, and he does this by staying in squats. Peter, he's also pretty similar, although he was very adamant about the benefits of sleeping rough, referring to it as a holiday, as a venture, as something that he very much chose, and he's not unfortunate in any way, shape, or form, and he refers to it as being a cheap life, an easy life. But I just want to, in making sense of this, I don't want it to make it sound that people are actually choosing homelessness, because that's not what I'm interpreting these stories as saying.